Dear brothers, what's up, boys? Happy Friday. NFL OTAs have started. I got my Patriots hat on today. I'm ready for my boy Drake May to become the truth here, because Lord knows he's gonna get the nod here at some point. So I'm hopeful that after these couple of years of us sucking immensely, my Patriots are going to figure it out. But my hopes can't be super, super high. The AFC East is stacked as long as Josh Allen is still here. Now we got to deal with Aaron Rodgers. Tua's going to get probably hurt again. I don't know. For my NFL people out there, we'll kind of see what happens. But today, we're going to stay on the strength train. Talked about isometrics, eccentrics, concentrics yesterday. Hopefully that helped you guys out a lot. I would save that episode because that will be something that is very helpful for all of you just as time goes on, just to think about. So as a recap, remember, slow with the eccentric part, that muscle's lengthening, take your time there. Have a little bit more oomph with the concentric part or the contracting part, and add isometrics kind of as you want, but they're not a necessity essentially for optimizing muscle growth. But make sure you are doing the eccentric. If you're missing it, it's not really doing us any good. So moving on from that, I always get asked what my favorite exercises are for X body part. What's your favorite bench variation, squat variation, et cetera, et cetera. So there's obviously a lot that I really like. There's, 100 different ways to do things, and some of it is subjective. Some people, I like to use the example, I get a lot more of a chest pump when I do a cable fly from like a low to high position. That just seems to give me the most pump in my chest. Whereas some other variations, I just feel it in the front of my shoulder, and it just feels like my connective tissues are just kind of mad, which isn't the kind of fatigue we want. So obviously a lot of it is subjective, but I do want to give you guys kind of my 10 favorite at the moment exercises, the 10 that I really like, that I think cover all of the bases and hit everything you need. So I'm basically going to go through all the different types of movements you can do and have one that is conditioning. So 10 total. This is in no particular order, by the way. So first one, when we think of all the movements that we do, the first one that everyone obviously thinks of is Monday is chest and arms day. So chest, my favorite pushing motion, okay, is actually the dumbbell bench press for several reasons. Number one, I like the fact that with a regular straight bar, your hands are set. I like that with a dumbbell, you can have a little bit of a degree turn with both hands. So instead of being at that straight, 0 degrees, I can go to kind of 45 degrees or even 90 degrees sometimes, especially if my elbows are getting closer. Maybe I want to work on my tricep a little bit more. But I also like the amount of shoulder stability that's required with the dumbbell bench press. Those dumbbells can move a little bit. So you're asking that shoulder to stabilize more effectively. Is it vastly better than a barbell bench press? No. But I do like the fact that it's asking a little bit more of you to stay stable, to hold those things still as it's coming down. So my favorite pushing movement, dumbbell bench press. No question. Okay. My favorite pressing motion. So when we say press, that means anything overhead, essentially. I personally prefer the machine overhead press. And here's why. And maybe I was thinking less personally for me on this, but most of my clients, the machine overhead press is just a better option. And the reason for that is most people do not have fantastic, what we call shoulder flexion, the ability for your arm to get straight up overhead. So if you want to test that while you're sitting there right now, hopefully not too crazy in the car, maybe reach your hand through the moonroof if you need to. But you should be able to put your arm straight up overhead, and people should be able to see your ear hole in front of your arm. A lot of people don't have that much range of motion. I notice this more with people that are over the age of 40 or 50. The machine overhead press, because it's a straight motion, it's actually a great way to kind of build better range of motion. And from a loading perspective, it's a lot easier to add weight to a machine overhead press than it is to a dumbbell or a barbell because of the amount of stability that's needed. And if you don't have the range of motion overhead, you're limited in what you can do. So we still want to be able to press and work through our delts, But a lot of people struggle with that. So that's the reason why I like the machine overhead press. It's a controlled motion. You can't go in or out of what's determined by the machine. We can load it better across time, and it can kind of make up for a little bit of some loss of motion, or we can work on range of motion in that machine. Okay. So that's press, machine overhead press. Pull. So I break pulling into kind of a downward or arms overhead downward pull and a row. So a row is basically, again, this is my own terminology. A row for me is anything where you're pulling south of your neck basically, and a pull is really anything that's coming downwards. A lot of people, you'll hear the word pull like they're deadlifting. I just put that in the hinge category. Honestly, they're meaningless categories. They're just exercises. So for me, the pull movement I like as a chin-up. I think chin-ups are just a great option. Reason being, the ceiling is lower for a lot of people, and it's going to give me a bigger bicep pump than a regular pull-up will, because I'm actually getting that motion a little bit better. Now, the big question you get is, well, what if I can't do a single chin-up? Should I use bands? Should I do this? I'm not a big fan of bands because the tension is obviously less at the top and far more at the bottom. So it's not really a fair assessment of how strong you are. I prefer people to like have a box they stand on, lower themselves, and they just use their foot or their leg as much as is necessary. Alternatively, you could get like a lat pull down machine. Turn your hands so they're facing you. You'll often hear that called supinated. And you pull down, touch your chest. Okay. So I like the chin up. I think it's a great way that you're going to get your lats. You're going to get a little extra bicep work, especially when you're that high overhead. That's the longest position that bicep can really get into, you know, with the exception of it like extending behind you, which we're going to get to a little bit later. But I do like the chin up as kind of my favorite pull down motion. Now, I separate rows into their own category. My favorite row is a low cable row. So you've set the cable column to the very, very bottom. You're slightly bent forward, hinged forward, and you're pulling basically your hand towards your pocket, pinching your shoulder blade back and down. Now, reason I like that, I just find that I get a much, much, much better upper back pump when I do that. My bicep gets some good work. I just tend to find that mechanically for me, I get a much better back workout when I do those versus something like a seated row or a bent over dumbbell row or a single arm dumbbell row. Again, this is just personal, subjective to me. Love the low cable row. Set that thing to the bottom, slight hinge forward, maybe 30 degrees or something like that. And you're just pulling your hand towards your pocket, holding for a count, coming back forward. Okay. So that is pull and row. My favorite pull, chin up. My favorite row, that low cable row is mean, dude. I'm telling you, your upper back, your rhomboids, you're going to be singing. I love it. Okay. Now let's move on to the lower body. My favorite squatting motion. I love the Smith machine back squat. Now, a lot of people will say that's blasphemous because, it's a Smith machine. It's making it easier for you to squat. You're right. But for most of you listening to this, you're just trying to look stronger. You're trying to get bigger. You're trying to look better with your clothes off. You want bigger muscles. 100% understand that. The beauty of the Smith machine, just like the overhead press machine, is that it's a single up and down motion. And because of that, I'm going to bring your feet forward a little bit more in the Smith machine, and we're going to squat down low as we can, controlled, and stand up. You can get a little bit more of a quad bias by doing the Smith machine versus doing a back squat where balance does play a pretty substantial, or it can play a substantial role. And things like your ankle mobility matters a lot when you're back squatting. And so we can kind of get around those things a little bit while still getting a lot of quad work specifically. And that's one of the big reasons that I like the Smith machine back squat. You know, the learning curve is very low. We're not having to, get people adjusted to balance and what have you. Now, in a perfect world, yes, I think everybody should back squat. I think it's super important. And so with that in mind, I still think from my favorites perspective, and when my quads get the most sizzle from a squat, it's with the Smith machine back squat. Okay. That's squat. Hinge. So I talked earlier, a lot of people, when they say pull, they're talking about deadlift. When I talk about a deadlift or something like that, I'm talking about hinging. So hinging is where you think of your waist like a hinge joint and your upper body is coming down while your butt basically goes back. It's hinging. So my favorite hinge by far, this is probably my favorite exercise of all of these, I think, is the dumbbell Romanian deadlift, because you're just killing so many birds with one stone and there's really no ceiling to it. So the dumbbell Romanian deadlift is basically your knees are very slightly unlocked. They're not stiff-legged. You'll hear stiff-legged deadlift often. Romanian deadlift, think about it like your knees are slightly, unlocked. And you are hips go back as far as you can. Dumbbells are going below your knees, ideally to like mid shin or towards the shoe. You're getting a huge stretch of your hamstrings, and then you go and stand up. I love dumbbell RDLs. They smoke the hamstrings. They get a great amount of fatigue and load into your hamstrings. You're also loading all of your back muscle erectors, specifically those big snake-like things that kind of run on either side of your spine. You're crushing that. It's also great in terms of building your grip strength, although at some point a lot of people struggle, so they have to use wraps. That's totally fine. You're just getting a lot of good work. Your upper back is getting work. Your lats are getting work. It's just a fabulous exercise. And you could do it with a barbell as well. I just like dumbbells. I think, obviously you can load a barbell a lot more than you can dumbbells. Like eventually it's just hard to hold 150 pounds in one hand and 150 in the other, but a 300-pound barbell might be a little bit easier. Oops, banging things in here. I love the dumbbell RDL. If you're going to do a single movement that hits at your hamstrings, dumbbell RDL is the baby. Okay, so that's hinge. Little extra caveat to the lower body. So I have a hinge, a squat, and I like to put lunge as kind of its own thing. From a lunging perspective, my absolute favorite is the reverse lunge. Now, my most hated is the rear foot elevated split squat, where your rear foot is actually elevated on a bench and you are doing a split squat up and down. That will absolutely ruin your quads and your glutes and even your adductors for a few days, those muscles that run kind of on the inside of your leg. But my absolute favorite, reverse lunges. I tend to find that it doesn't bother people's knees as much. It doesn't bother my knees nearly as much, even though my knees don't really get bothered with lunges. But the reverse lunge just tends to be a little less bothersome for people. And it is my absolute favorite lunge variation. Again, my most hated is rear foot elevated split squats. As a little aside, I think everybody should do lateral lunges if they can, because it's one of the few ways that we can get really good kind of loading through the inner muscles on your thigh, through your adductors. And groin strains are far too common with people because they just don't load those positions. They slip, a foot kind of goes out on them, and they're not used to being strong in that spot. So reverse lunges are my favorite, but add like a little bit of lateral lunging just for giggles. Okay, arms. Everybody loves arms. Everyone likes big arms for the most part. What are my favorite two there? Okay, first one. I love, this is my personal preference in terms of a single isolated bicep movement. Cable machine, you are facing away from it and your hands are actually behind you. Cable columns are set to the very bottom on both sides. You have the handles and you take a step forward just slightly. So your arms are kind of behind you and you're holding on to two handles. From there, curl all the way up. So it's almost like your hands are dragged behind you. I call it a drag cable curl. But you guys, there's 100 different things that you could call it if you really wanted to. What you need to know is you're basically doing a cable curl, but instead of facing the cable column, you're actually facing the other way. I like this because you get a much bigger stretch of the bicep, but I find it more comfortable than doing a incline bicep curl where you're kind of laying on on an incline bench and your arms hang. I tend to find that bothers my bicep tendon a little bit more than my biceps themselves. That's why I prefer the standing, facing away from the column curl. So that cable drag curl from that position, I think is elite. My biceps are toast. Absolute toast when I'm done with that. Okay, that's my bicep movement. My favorite tricep movement is actually a standing overhead tricep extension with the cable machine. I typically will use a rope. But again, this is where you have the cable column set to typically like at the very bottom or like a couple notches up from that. You're facing away. You're going to hold the cable. It's going to be behind your head. I'll post links to all these videos and stuff on YouTube. I'm showing people what to do. But you're facing away. You're letting your arms bend as far back as they can, come all the way up, extend, fully straighten at the top. I find that my triceps are just wrecked wrecked when I do that. More wrecked than pretty much any other exercise that I do. I just get the most bang for my buck, I feel like, when I do that tricep extension. So last but not least, this is a conditioning movement. So this is my favorite piece of conditioning equipment and exercise that I think anybody can do. And I say this all the time. I have one myself. I just bought it recently because I love it so much. I think the single best conditioning piece of equipment you can buy is an Airdyne of any variety. Rogue makes the Echo Bike, Schwinn makes an 87, Assault Fitness makes all sorts now, like the Pro X, and they make an Elite, and they have their Assault, they have their classic air bike. Every company is making them now. It is a beautiful piece of equipment. It's an arm and leg bike. It's a fan bike. You can just get so much fantastic conditioning done with that one piece of equipment. You can do lower intensity cardio on there, or you can get up into your like VO2 max work where we're doing sprints and getting into zone 5 heart rates. And I just find it to be so great. And say you have an injury or something to your lower body, you can still use the upper part with the arms. Okay. A lot of other machines, they're kind of single use. I like having the arm and leg component because it's just a good way to get warmed up. It's a good way to work on some basic zone 2, zone 3 cardio, or you can do like your VO2 max work on that bike. I think if you have one piece of conditioning equipment in your home, it should be an air bike. That was all 10. How about that? So I'm going to review them again. My 10 favorite exercises. Number 1 in the push category, dumbbell bench press. It's my absolute favorite. I get the most bang for my buck in terms of how my chest and triceps feel after it. I also think that it adds a little bit more stability, or it asks a little bit more stability of the shoulder. And I think that's kind of a nice thing to have relative to the bench where it's just kind of a straight position of your hands. I like the ability to kind of move the wrist a little bit, which helps people a lot. Okay, so that's my push. Number 2, my press. I love the machine overhead press. Again, it kind of forces you to stay in a single position. A lot of people struggle with overhead range of motion, and it's much easier to load that machine relative to a dumbbell, which eventually just gets hard to get to your shoulder. So that machine, we can load a little bit more, and we can build some really substantial strength in that position while also building up your range of motion. Okay, that's number 2, machine overhead press. Number 3, my favorite pull down, if you will, is the chin up. I think you're getting a lot of bang for your buck. You're getting your lats involved. You're getting a big stretch of your bicep, and you're working just kind of on your global back as a whole. It's my favorite. I prefer it to pull-ups. I think they both have their merit, but if you made me pick one or the other, I'm probably going to pick the chin up. If you want bigger lats, you go with the pull-up. Now, number 4, my favorite rowing variation is the cable low row. This is where the cable column is set to the very bottom. You're pulling that hand towards your pocket, really pinching your shoulder blade up and back. I just find that my rhomboids are singing. The middle of my back, the upper part of my back is singing. My lats are also singing when I am doing that. You're even going to get a little bit of your trap getting mad, especially if you're getting a little bit of a shrug in there. But that is my favorite row versus all the others. Okay. Number 5, let's get into the lower body. My favorite squat is the Smith machine back squat. I like the fact that I can bias my quads a little bit more. I get far, far more stimulus for me when I am doing a Smith machine back squat. I can load it very easily. The learning curve really isn't high for all of you listening if you've never really back squatted effectively before. Do I think people should back squat? 100%. But if I had to pick one, I love the Smith machine back squat. Okay. Moving on to my favorite hinge motion. It's the dumbbell Romanian deadlift, the dumbbell RDL. You are getting so much for that one exercise. You're getting the erectors of your back. You're getting your lats. You're getting your upper back. You're getting your grip strength. You're smoking through your your glutes, and your hamstrings are getting a huge stimulus that can actually be, keeping you sore for a few days. I just find it's my favorite posterior chain movement by far, dumbbell Romanian deadlift. Okay. Moving on to the lunge category. It's reverse lunges all day. I find that it bothers people's knees a lot less. It's certainly, I feel like I still get a very, very good pump out of it. It's a little bit more, of a glute-driven movement where I'm coming back and stepping forward. And that can be just really beneficial because you're just going to get a little more glute. You're still going to get plenty of quad, don't worry. But my most hated of the lunges, though, is rear foot elevated split squats. They wreck my quads. I get a huge stimulus out of them. But my favorite, reverse lunges. Okay. Moving on to arms. Number 9. I think that The low cable drag curl is my favorite. So facing away from the column, hands are down, slightly pulled back behind you, and you curl from there. My biceps are toast every time that I do that movement. And it doesn't bother my bicep tendon, that upper part, my bicipital groove, which is kind of this little guy here in the front of your shoulder. I don't find as much discomfort there. I'm getting strictly bicep fatigue and stimulus, and that's exactly what you want. Now, my favorite tricep movement, number 9, is the overhead tricep cable extension. I love this. You're facing away, hands are behind your head, letting your hands come all the way down, straightening up. I just find that crushes my triceps. That's my favorite there. And number 10, my favorite conditioning movement. By far. Everyone should own an air bike. No questions asked. You can do your arms, you can do your legs. It's undefeated. It's just undefeated. That's what you need to know. There's a lot of honorable mentions. We don't need them, but I mentioned a couple of them while I was in there, but those are my 10 favorite exercises. If I'm making you guys work out, those are 10 things that you're probably going to see and want to get good at. There's obviously variations. Everyone's a little different, but those are my favorite. And if you don't like them, well, screw you. It's my podcast. God bless. Be strong. I love you all. Have an incredible weekend. Hey, we're going to be episode 100 next Friday, boys. Woo! 100 episodes of Dear Brothers, baby. Thank you all. I appreciate your support. Love you all. Have an incredible weekend. We'll see y'all.